The Unlatched Mind. Today we have Dr. Paul Thagard. Dr. Thagard has been on before. We've recorded with him several months ago. So today we're talking about universal basic income, and Dr. Thagard wrote a blog on I think it was titled "The Ethics of Basic Income." So it's a topic that can easily become politicized, and it has been politicized like most things. But we tried not to go there. We spoke a little left versus right, and liberal versus conservative, because you really can't have the basic income conversation without touching on the political realm. But I think we did a pretty decent job of keeping it apolitical. So we talked about general basic income, universal basic income, whatever you want to call it. Just basically the idea of, is it ethical as for society to take money from quote unquote a government, which is really other people's money, right? And be kind of giving it out to those in need. How do you define in need? How do you pick and choose? Does everyone get the money? Where do you draw a line? Kind of, we touched on all that. And then we talked about the pending artificial intelligence, I'd say, revolution that we're kind of hearing more and more about, where, is AI going to take all of our jobs, or a subset of our jobs? Or is there a pending tipping point in which that the economy will no longer be stable because more and more people will be out of work due to automation and other things? So, will basic income be a requirement as opposed to just a desire of one side of the aisle or not? So we touch on that as well. So anyway, enjoy the conversation. And with that, I give you Dr. Thagard. Well, Paul, thanks so much for doing this again. I appreciate it.
Well, it was fun last time, so I'm happy to do it again.
I do a lot of searching for interesting topics, and I got to be honest, a lot of the stuff that interests you, especially Psychology Today, is stuff that just kind of crosses over into my wheelhouse, things that I really, in fact, I wanted to reach out to you earlier. I was like, I just did it with Paul. Let me just kind of chill out a little bit, because so many of the things that that interest you and you write about is also in my wheelhouse. So it's a lot of overlap there. So, and obviously the topic for today, the ethics of basic income. I mean, I think that's now, originally when I reached out, this is not a political podcast, and I was like thinking it was going to be more political, just because of that's UBI, universal basic income, is something you hear. You hear it on the news a lot, right? And it's more of a the capitalists will say it's a socialist thing, poo-poo that. The other side will say it's the right thing for humanity, and then there's the arguments between. But I think you took a very non-political angle to the whole thing, and it's just really, in fact, I think you said it more explicitly at the beginning. It's just you were looking mainly to define whether it's ethical for basic income to be a thing that we should all strive for.
That's right. It's also a political issue because it's going to take a government to implement it. Mm. But the question is, why should they or should they not? And that's really an ethical question. I think the politics should follow the ethics.
Right. Now, when you say, now I know you reference, I think you mostly reference basic income. I don't think you went as far as to say universal basic income, which means something, right? So I guess when you were writing, what was your perspective on what type of basic income this was? Or were you just talking more in the general sense?
Well, the kind of policy I had in mind was one where you make sure that everybody has a certain amount. It's not that everybody in the country gets a check. Lots of people got lots of money. And so you don't send checks to rich people. Instead, it's to make sure that everybody, the worst off people in the society, have got enough to cover their basic needs, including shelter and food and ability to live a decent life. So that's what I'm at. Not everybody, money goes out to everybody, but just there's a system in place, and there's a lot of different ways it could be done to make sure that people who don't have jobs, who don't have incomes, can have a certain amount guaranteed to them.
And this is like is it an unconditional type distribution, whereas like the welfares and the other things come with a certain stigma, and there's a certain stigma, like I said, or negative that comes along with the certain plans that we have. I'll say we, meaning at least the United States, and that's all I know. But
well, those plans not only come with a stigma, they also come with a huge bureaucratic cost. So if you've got a system like welfare where you're trying to figure out whether somebody's really deserving or not, then you have to have a big bureaucracy and a lot of people to try to enforce it. So one reason that people on the right, as well as people on the left, can support basic income is it can actually reduce bureaucracy and reduce government costs. So it's not just a big handout. It can actually be something that's much more efficient.
Mm. Right, right. But I mean, at some point, you have to draw a
Because you
line of
could,
who deserves it, right? I mean, you could make, I'm making up numbers. You could make $100,000 a year, but you've started a business and your profit is 400. Your profit is basically $500 a month, and you're barely scraping by because you're trying to grow a business. So, and I think that's where it gets kind of sketchy, right? Where's the who steps in and says, well, you can get it or you can't, and then doesn't it just disincentivize some of the folks that are in that situation I just kind of laid out, where, what I mean?
Okay, those are two separate questions. One is the question of how you can figure out who gets it, but the other is whether it's a good idea or not, the disincentivized question. So those are separate. As far as trying to figure out who gets it, we've already got a system of assessing incomes. It's income tax. So everybody's filing an income tax return, and so that's all being tracked by the government anyway. And so it's easy to tell when there are people who don't have an income that is enough to live on. And so that's actually not that hard to do. Right. The other one is a different question that tends to get into more ethical and political questions of whether it's a bad thing to have basic income because of the slacker problem, because some people will just exploit the system and just not work and be parasites on the system overall. But that one also is not just a ethical question, it's also an empirical question, because you have to ask, well, how will people respond if a basic income system is put into place? And that's where the social experiments are so important. There are a few underway now, and there's been a few in the past, but you can't just say a priori there's going to be a lot of slackers, there's going to be a lot of people cheating, and we have to actually see what happens when you do it. One of the few studies that's actually carried out was one done in Manitoba in the 1970s. And that the basic thing about that is it went on for a while, and then there was a change in government. A right-wing government came in and they canceled it because they didn't like the idea of it. And the data that was collected for that study just sat unanalyzed for decades. But when somebody finally looked at it, what they found was actually quite interesting. This was in Dauphin, Manitoba. They found, in fact, that the slackers, the people who were just floating on it, free riders, wasn't that big a problem. And lots of people did benefit from it. Their health was better, education was better, and their lives seemed to improve. But that was a very small study. So that's why it's really good that other places in the world, like, Ontario until recently, Ontario had a pilot program underway, a 3-year program, and it looked like the results were going to be quite interesting. But then there was a change in government and a more right-wing government, and without even waiting to see what the results were, they just canceled it. And so it's hard to figure out whether it's going to work. But that they were going on prejudice more than evidence that it would have the slacker problem that you talk about.
Right, and that's where you can't separate the politics, because if you're on the right, your constituents are going to be you're going to you need to represent them, and anything that even includes the concept of taking money from the rich and giving to the less fortunate, the poor, whatever, however you want to define it, is going to be an automatic scarlet letter on you. So it's just tough for. It would take someone with some real forward thinking and real, I would say, cojones, if you will, to go, against their constituents. And say,
but that's where it gets actually
quite
complicated. That's true of a lot of right versus left issues. But this one, there are libertarians in Silicon Valley who support this because they think that with increasing automation, it's a really serious problem, and this is one way they see of dealing with it in a relatively benign way. But in fact, in Canada, one of the major supporters for the idea of basic income was a conservative senator. He wrote the report that convinced the Ontario government, just because he thought that it was going to be socially responsible. So it's not completely a right-left issue, although it does have a big cast on that.
Right. Yeah, I mean, no matter what, there's going to be slackers, right? I mean, no matter what system's out there, there's going to be folks taking advantage. But that in itself, I don't think should dissuade from at least looking at the data, making some actual heuristical observations to the data. I mean,
you got to look at the overall cost benefit.
Right.
So if you have a few slackers, you can tolerate a few at least, if you're getting huge benefit for lots of other people. And think of what happens in grocery stores or department stores. They know that there's going to be shoplifting.
Right.
Some people are going to steal some of their goods, and that's bad for them. Obviously, it costs them money, but they figure, well, they're going to make enough money off the other people that this is going to be a
Right. They
problem.
actually
They'll
plan
simply
for it, right?
tolerate
I
it.
mean, it's actually in
Yeah,
their financial
yeah, they call it
forecast.
shrinkage,
Right,
and
right.
that's yeah. So that's just part of the cost of doing business. So part of the cost of government is that some things will go wrong with the system. Now, if you had vast numbers of people doing this, but at least from the Dolphin study, most people actually like to work. Most people want to be responsible, and so they use basic income not as a way to settle down and in front of the TV, but rather to improve their lives and to try to do things better to get a transition in their lives toward employment.
Right,
So
right.
there's going to be slackers, but that's true of any system, and I don't think that's sufficient grounds to dismiss it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it even just prepping for this discussion, I was fighting I would say my fiscal conservative bias, right? That's generally where I go. I'm a hard worker. I've always been a fan of, if I fail, it's my fault. If I succeed, it's my fault. So I was fighting that, just a personal kind of struggle, just trying to open my mind a little bit. And I watched a bunch of TED Talks on the whole slacker concept, and in that being an opposition to kind of to UBI, and it really got me thinking. And I think generally the data does show, I think kind of what you were alluding to, is that folks don't want to, because most basic income strategies, at least that ones I've seen, are not really enough to really excel. I mean, you're just basically getting enough money to survive, right? You get good shelters.
Somebody's got. Yeah, given the cost of housing and the cost of food, even if you're getting $20,000 a year, you're not living high.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Right.
But the cost issue is quite interesting, because you want to make this affordable. But one thing to keep in mind is that problems like homelessness have a huge social cost to them. Mm. So think about the health costs. People who live on the street are usually sick a lot because they're not eating well and they're living out in horrible elements. Mm. And that's more extreme in a country like Canada that has universal health care, because they're costing the system a lot of money. But even in the U.S., where you've got public hospitals that have to take in anybody who shows up at their door, that's a huge cost for people who are sick all the time.
Right.
And so if you can get people into better housing and have enough money to get decent food, then they're not going to be sick as much, and so they're going to be less of a financial strain on the system for that purpose.
Right, and I feel like the basic principle also, and again, this is going against my natural kind of instincts, but if folks, and it's tough to articulate, but if you had just enough to survive, and you know your children are going to be fed at least decently, and you're going to have enough with hopefully the school system, and you're not worried about the basics, and maybe this is more optimistic, maybe it's more optimistically thinking, but I think most folks are energized by that feeling, and they might try some things. They might try to go on a limb and be a little bit more entrepreneurial because they don't have the burden of just providing the basics. I really want to think that's the case. And a lot of,
and there is a bit of evidence for that from the Dauphin, Manitoba study, that's in fact what happens. I mean, people have a need for competence. They have a need for achievement. They have need to accomplish things. And I think that's nearly universal. And what the basic income enabled people to do in that study was to do things like get some more education, or looked into the possibility of being involved in starting a business or something like that, where you can do that kind of improvement rather than being absolutely destitute and not being able to even manage getting food.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's and in fact, you just touched on you had brought out three distinct, I think you call them psychological vital needs: autonomy, relatedness, and competence. Actually, if you want to just walk through those and kind of describe how you think UBI, or BI, I should say, basic income, kind of contribute to these three.
Yeah, this is what I think is the basis for an ethical argument for basic income. It's something you could say is a human right, but where do human rights come from? So some people think that human rights are self-evident or that they're God-given, but I don't think that's true. There's got to be more of an argument why people have certain set of rights. Most people nowadays believe that there are human rights, but where do they come from? The best account I've seen of this came from my philosophical colleague, Brian Arend. He said we should tie human rights to human needs, because then you get something objective. This is part of human nature. And so it's obvious that people need to have food or else they'll die. People need to have shelter in a cold winter or else they'll die. People need to have health care, or they're going to die way earlier than they would have otherwise. So I think we can use needs as the way to do that. But what I've tried to do in my book, Natural Philosophy, is to connect needs not just with these biological requirements to keep you alive, but also with psychological evidence about what kinds of factors make people's lives full, that makes them the kinds of lives that humans are best with. And they are relied on work coming out of clinical psychology that says that the fundamental human needs at the psychological level, not just at the biological level, are those three: autonomy, which is freedom. So that's the one that wants to obviously avoid government interference in people's lives. Autonomy is one, but also relatedness, which is connections with other people. There's vast literature that shows that relatedness or belongingness or having good relationships with other people is really crucial for people living the kinds of lives they want to live. And the third one that I just mentioned is competence or achievement or accomplishment. This is also something that's important in people's lives. So the argument that I made in Natural Philosophy and also in the blog that I took out of it is that when you take into account these three vital needs, then you can see that basic income sounds like a really good idea, because you can indicate what the connection is between having a guaranteed income and satisfying these needs.
Now, so yeah, I mean, so 100% agree there. I mean, in fact, relatedness, I think every study that ever, so many of the studies point to, we're social creatures, and, at the end of a life, when they take these polls in nursing homes and other folks that are in hospice, and at the end of their the end of their life, it's always the same thing. That's, there's social interactions, there's social circles were the most important things of their lives. And I think it all ties to relatedness, and they're closer.
Yeah.
And the
or to give another dramatic example, you find that being lonely, being cut off from social connection, is the health effects of smoking a pack of cigarettes a day.
Yeah. No, I've seen a lot of those studies. It's 100% true. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, isolation is one of the most definitive causes of an earlier, quote unquote, earlier death. It's yeah.
Yeah. So this is why I think relatedness, along with autonomy or freedom, and along with competence, being able to do things that you consider worthwhile, are human needs that provide the basis for figuring out what do we think are the rights that people have. And so you can have an argument for rights rather than just pulling them out of the air.
I mean, how does human greed tie into this? This is a problem I always have thinking about this. I always say, hey, and I think looking, 50, 100 years, and we'll get into the AI thing and that in a second, where machines do a lot of the hard labor that we're all currently doing today. But, in a world where we can all spend more time with friends, family, that we don't have to spend. I mean, with the agricultural revolution and industrial revolution, there's a lot of the basic things to survive that we as people no longer had to do. But it seems that human greed just keeps it's proportional to the amount of improvements that technology makes. So we always just want more. So it's not like, and this is kind of where I struggle with, if and perhaps we're all not, and I know this is true, we're all from different molds. We're not exactly all the same, so we all have different levels of wants and greed and whatever. But I feel like human greed is a thing, and it's pretty much universal. But so if you gave someone the basics to survive, and they had what they needed, in a perfect world, we'd all just take a step back, relax. Everyone could eat. We all have our little small houses that just gave us shelter. No one would want the bigger house and the better car and the, it's. Is there a time when, like, it doesn't really matter how much you give people? We're always going to want more, or is that just some of us? You know what I mean? And then we're still going to be.
I think there are individual differences there.
Yeah,
there's people like Gordon Gekko, who was a famous thing. You said
right.
Greed is good. Yeah, right. Yeah. So I mean, there are people for whom I think the greed is perhaps, and there are people who don't care about other people. But fortunately, I think there is a minority. So psychopaths who are lacking in empathy for other people are only about 1% of the population.
Thank God,
so
right?
And that's a scarily large amount.
Right.
But still, that means that 99% of people are capable of caring for other people and worrying about their well-being. So that's good. So you can't really talk to the psychopaths,
Right.
but you can talk to the other 99% of people who do that. And of course, people are still going to want more in some cases, but we're dealing with the basic income for people who have almost nothing. That is, people who are having trouble getting housing, getting food, even just surviving. And so it's not a question of greed for them. It's a question of whether people who have lots of money, billionaires, millionaires who have got, whether they're just going to be greedy and not give up any money. But there's lots of counterexamples to that too. Look at Bill Gates. Bill Gates is one of the richest people in the world, but he's spending his money now in a wonderful way, helping some of the worst off people in the world, namely sick people in Africa.
Oh, he's extremely altruistic and philanthropic, but here's the pushback there.
Exactly.
But however, if a lot of these tenets were in place when he was coming up, he may not have made it. That's the issue that I hear about the Warren Buffetts and the Bill Gates. If these if true capitalism was not in place when they were coming up, they may not have reached this, the stature they're at today and have the ability they have today to give.
But that seems crazy. If you actually would it have stopped the rise of Microsoft or Berkshire Holdings if income tax had been 10% higher? No, those companies would still have been hugely successful. So I think that argument doesn't work at all.
Well, it is. I mean, that is one of the arguments. I mean, yeah, 10%. That example, it's simple.
That's a bad one. Well, the slacker argument is a better argument because you do want to be concerned about it. But this one, that there has to be people who are building businesses getting 100% of the benefits of their business in order to do it. That's just empirically false. I mean, it used to be in the United States and other countries that the marginal income tax rate was much higher, but still people built businesses and were quite successful. So that none of that would have stopped Microsoft or Berkshire Holdings.
Right. Yeah. That's just a natural thing you always see on the counter side. And I guess it's all a matter of degree, right? I mean, 10% here, they would still work through that and have become the empire they are. But how far it's always that slippery slope. And then it's always the slippery slope argument, which sometimes holds water, sometimes doesn't.
Yeah, well, it's certainly not a universally valid argument because there are places where you get changes from quantity into quality, and if you don't get unless you get to the tipping point. So there are ways of having higher taxes and still having a vibrant economy. So there's the idea of basic income is certainly not socialist. It doesn't say that you should get rid of capitalism or there should be enormous appropriation of wealth. It's saying that you can take some of the wealth that's out there, take some of the income that's out there and distribute it just a bit more equally. And as a result, take care of the people who are worst off. That's who the basic income is aimed at.
Yeah. It's yeah. I'm fighting my this is. I love it in theory, and I'm fighting my some of my gut instincts here. But no, I love the conversation already. I'll be honest. So
well, that's where it's really good to be empirical.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, just don't go with general ideas, but go with what seems to happen in different societies. And here we've got some natural experiments because you can compare countries like the United States with other countries like Canada, where I live, or the Scandinavian countries, or
Norway,
European countries, where the economies can be quite vibrant, but there's a more equal distribution of income.
Yeah. You can also say that some of the folks, it's tough though. I mean, a lot of the technical innovation and the medical innovation that really helps the world tends to come from, and I don't know the stats here, but I feel like it tends to come from some of the nations with the biggest, disparity between wealth, because you have that it's almost like human greed left untamed is horrible, but it's also good because it just allows folks to just innovate.
Well, but this is another empirical question. What motivates technologists? When Gates was building Microsoft, I know a lot of people in tech industries, and a lot of what they're doing is they just like to build really cool stuff. They're not always thinking, well, I'm going to be a billionaire. They like cool stuff. I mean, they love a program that works elegantly or something that's going to provide a solution to a commercial or social problem. And so people who I know who are most creative aren't driven by greed at all. They like interesting, fascinating ideas that solve difficult challenges.
Well, that's true. 100% true. Agree with that. In fact, a lot of the hiring we do at my company and other things, we're noticing that, because you look at the human resource studies and all that, they look at, well, what really motivates people? Hey, they want to do really interesting stuff, be left alone, be able to work from home when they want. It's all the things that you would think, and money is there, but it's lower on the list. It's
on my list. They want autonomy and they want competence.
Yeah.
That is, they want a sense of accomplishment. Or here's another example. The hottest field right now in artificial intelligence, I'm sure you know, is deep learning. Well, where did deep learning come from? It came from academics, people like Jeff Hinton in Toronto. Did he care about money? Oh no, he wanted to do cool stuff. He was trying to figure out how the mind works. He wanted to have really great technology, and it took a while before it turned out to be commercially important. It turned out he ended up getting a bunch of money from Google for it, but that was never his motivation. His motivation was to do really interesting things and be respected academically and solve hard problems. So I don't think that you need to have maximum greed in order to have maximum commercial success. All the evidence goes in the other direction, especially in the technology area where you're solving intellectually challenging problems that are really satisfying just to get it right.
No, there's some truth there for sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Like I said, the HR study should prove that. Now, so one of the things, I struggle with, and maybe this is a little too black and white, but I remember when the healthcare in the United States, the Affordable Health Care Act kicked in, and there was a lot of controversy over it, and whatever. We won't get the details there, but at one point, I remember my personal rates went up. I think it was 3 to 4%, 3 to 4 times, excuse me. So that was a huge jump in my personal, expense for healthcare, and I have a lot of friends struggling with Obamacare this or this, that, or, they were struggling with it. And I remember kind of reflecting on it. And I remember at one point saying, well, politics aside, if there are folks in this country that are going to be, that did not have health insurance, that were on the verge of bankruptcy, if their daughter had God forbid, an accident or something, and they just were, if I'm going to help that, then I'm actually happy. And my family I'm blessed enough that it didn't impact us to the point where it changed our lives. So, I kind of felt good about it just from an ethical perspective. So I remember that feeling going, because again, being mostly in fiscal conservative context a lot of times, and not always. I'm changing some of the circles there, but I remember saying, well, at the end of the day, if there are families in this country that are literally getting health insurance now because of the increased wages that I'm paying and others like me are paying, then man, that just feels good. And I know that's not a fiscal conservative way to look at things, but it just felt good. Now, on the flip side,
well, it's an altruistic and I think ethical way of looking at it.
Right. Now on the flip side, here's where it gets a little slippery. Now, if I had to give extra money to ensure some other folks and other families could get basic health care, and my children, instead of getting exceptional health care, were only able to get basic health care, right? So everything has a cost. Would I have been okay with that? Where I want my children to have the best of everything. Now, and maybe it's a little bit, a little bit black and white looking at it that way, but, and I don't think that was the case when I, just thinking about it altruistically. Like I said, I felt good about the whole thing when it happened, but maybe that was just me putting on my selfish hat. Maybe that was because I didn't really feel like there's going to be any impact to my family. So
yeah, well, but that's getting very personal about it, but there's broader questions. And here it's really useful to do international comparisons. So I'm Canadian, which is Canada's had universal health care since the 80s. But I lived in the US for 15 years. I have American citizenship, so I'm familiar with both systems. And I travel a lot in Europe as well. And I always talk to people about systems. So you can look to see how it can work. A lot of people in the US have been put in that very difficult situation, but compared to other people, the United States pays far more per capita for healthcare than any other country, and it gets worse results. To give you one example, the life expectancy in Canada, even though it's not nearly as rich a country as the United States, is 3 years per person compared to the US. People live 3 years longer. there are other reasons for that than just healthcare, but a big part is that there's universal healthcare so that poor people have their healthcare covered. And that's viewed almost universally in Canada, even by people who are in the most conservative parties, as something that's just a good thing about the country. No, the most conservative politician in Canada could never challenge universal healthcare because it would be instant political death. People know that it's just such a good thing that you don't have to worry about bankruptcy as a result of health costs, and that's been in place since 1984 with good outcomes. There's other issues about the Canada health system, but definitely it's just a really good thing. And the U.S. system is a really strange hybrid right now because it's been so difficult to bring in something like a universal health plan of the sort that you find all over Europe, that you find in Australia and New Zealand. So all the other well-off countries in the world have that, and people really like it because it gets health anxiety off the table.
But no, isn't
so that's but the U.S. has got a really strange way in which it's done it, because it's done it with this mixture of trying to maintain all the private health plans and then just adding Obamacare on top of that, which some of the some of the Republicans don't even want in small versions. So there are good and bad ways to implement healthcare, just as there's good and bad ways of implementing basic income. You want to do it in a way that's efficient, that's cost effective, and also fair. But I think it can be done in both cases. It certainly has been done in Canada and Europe and Australia to have a universal healthcare system that doesn't break the bank and that nevertheless makes sure that people, regardless of their income, regardless of their health conditions, no one here worries about pre-existing conditions, they're going to be covered for the basic needs.
Yeah. I mean, it is tough to just, look at the reality of, money will literally buy extended life. I mean, that's in our country, that's kind of what it is. I mean, it literally is. If you are more well off, I mean, the joke is if your child, son or daughter goes in for some surgery, you say, treat them like the president's child or something. Well, why? Because the president has more money, more power, more influence. They'll get better doctors, better surgeons, and literally will increase the odds of that surgery becoming, the outcome of that surgery being successful.
Well, it's a bit more complicated than that, because sometimes more healthcare isn't better.
Well, true. But you got to say, I think most stories that I hear, and again, I really do try hard to see both sides, that some of the best surgeons in the world are here in the United States. And I have friends that are overseas, and they have literally, in fact, I have one example, and I won't mention her name, that I used to work with, where she was in Germany, and her surgeon literally sent her, or requested that they wrote the script, I guess, for the surgery to be done in the United States, because they said they didn't really have the resources, or they said the best, it was a very complicated surgery, so maybe this is a more unique case, but they had to have it done in the United States because of the uniqueness of the heart surgery and all that. And you kind of hear that a lot, and I don't know if that's overblown, it gets political, but again, it's...
No, but I mean, U.S. healthcare at the top level is the best in the world. I'd agree with that. It's superb. But there are still a lot of people in the United States that don't have access to much in the way of healthcare
or any of it, right. Even the most basic, right.
So they maybe end up in emergency if they're near death.
Yeah.
And so that's why you end up people dying prematurely and suffering a whole lot. So I think it's actually good that you brought this up, because the healthcare the case is analogous to the basic income case. In both cases, you're dealing with what I think are human needs that establish fundamental rights. And then it comes down to the question of how do you find the money and how do you find the correct allocation of income that's going to ensure that all humans get treated equally with respect to something that's absolutely fundamental.
Right. Yeah.
That doesn't mean that everybody has to have the same amount of money. It doesn't mean that there can't be successful entrepreneurs and there can't be companies that are innovating and do great things, but it means that there has to be a fundamental safety net that's going to catch all people. And lots of countries in the world have established that. The Scandinavian countries, England, France, Germany, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, it can be done more or less well. And I think that, going back to our original argument, basic income is one of the ways of taking the next step to provide a broader set of need satisfaction in the same way that a good healthcare does.
Yeah.
But I mean, people don't complain in Canada about, our taxes are so high because we have to pay for other people's healthcare. I mean, that's just issue completely dropped off the table 4 decades ago.
Yeah, maybe that's part of it is, the United States is in a state of transition or we haven't quite made that transition where, the Affordable Health Care Act was a step in that direction. And then I think some of it's been peeled back, but not all of it. And so perhaps it's the transitional aspect of it that it makes it difficult, where we're not quite there yet. And, it's just, if it will ever happen, who knows? But I think the transition between A and B is probably harder than being an A or B, I feel like.
Well, in the U.S., it's become more polarized. It used to be that there were Republicans who thought that it was a good idea to have something like, wasn't it Massachusetts under a Republican governor that set up a system that was very similar to Obamacare? But somehow, as the U.S. became more polarized politically, it became harder for people who are more conservative to accept this idea. But as I said, in Canada or England or Germany or France, the most conservative, fiscally responsible politicians realize that healthcare at the universal level is just a really great thing to have in your society.
Yeah, it's just one of those things that you would think just would almost transcend left versus right, or Republican versus Democratic, liberal versus conservative, whatever. It's healthcare. It's the ability to, when somebody's sick, at whatever degree, they would get at least the basic medical expertise to help them live, right? You would think it would almost just transcend.
Look at the Economist magazine, which is a right of center free enterprise magazine, and very sophisticated in economic analysis. But they think that the fact that the United States doesn't have universal health care is just bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, again, so even coming from a fiscal conservative, if someone could go bankrupt because they get sick or had a condition when they were a child, it kind of blows my mind, to be honest. It just...
Well, I think I forget the percentage. I think it was about something like 30% of bankruptcies in the United States are because of healthcare. Nobody in Canada ever becomes bankrupt because of healthcare costs, as far as I know. It's just not something that can completely destroy people's financial situation.
Yeah, that alone you think would be, well, everything's political. And the infighting will just continue.
I mean, it's not because in that case people become bankrupt because they've been spendthrifty or made really stupid decisions. It was just because people get cancer, or they get multiple sclerosis, or they get lots of other nasty diseases, just as really plain bad luck.
Right. So I guess fast forwarding to, and maybe this whole thing will be a moot point, because we'll at least I would say in the United States anyway, just from speaking from that one perspective, that we will require universal basic income because of the encroaching AI and this whole stuff that kind of you're the expert in. I mean, do you feel like, because reading, we had talked about through email, the ethics of UBI and basic income, and then the impending, AI revolution, where maybe this is something that, will half the jobs be eliminated, and will something like a basic income be required? And what I kind of struggled with was, is this different than it's happened several times before, the Industrial Revolution, the Agricultural Revolution. There's a lot of things, a lot of people put out of work by machines, right? Farmers, complete revolutionary, with tractors and the combustion engine. Farming was completely revolutionized. It didn't really, it didn't collapse the economy. Or folks, they found, they produced more crops, people ate more, costs went down. It was good. There's always a level of adjustment, but or a period of adjustment. But now, do you feel this one coming is different?
Well, this really is an empirical question that I'm not really an expert on. I'm very interested in artificial intelligence, as you know, and recent blog posts that I did on the Psychology Today blog, I used the same needs-based framework for addressing a bunch of questions around the ethics of AI. And so that's definitely should come up here with the question of employment. What makes it difficult is, first of all, it's very difficult to predict just how much AI is going to progress. Right now, it's incredibly hot, and there's a lot of legitimate excellent ideas around, but it's hard to say what the impact is going to be. And as you mentioned, it's also hard to predict what kind of substitutions will take place in the job market. So some people actually think that we shouldn't be worrying about the huge changes in the workplace as a result of AI, because those changes are going to take place. But as you suggested, there are going to be new kinds of jobs that will arise that could replace those. I'm a little bit skeptical, though, about the analogies you made. When agriculture became automated, and so there wasn't that much need for farm workers anymore, the automation or the changes in the production of manufacturing was dramatic, and so there's a huge increase in the need for people working in factories.
Right.
So the shift there was from people working on farms to people working in factories, and so there were still lots of jobs. Now the factory jobs, as you know, are decreasing because of increased automation, and so where are people going to work? And here it gets problematic because it used to be that people who had, say, a grade 10 education could do a number of things. They could work on a farm, they could work in a factory. But what do you do with a grade 10 education in a highly technological world? So that does make it seem to me that it is something different here, because it's going to be hard to find jobs for people. Or consider what I've been looking at in the book I'm writing right now is, among other things, the self-driving cars and trucks.
Right.
Now, it's hard to predict exactly when that's going to take over. Elon Musk says 1 year. Rodney Brooks, who's one of the major people in robotics, says 100 years. and
take an
these
average.
People, yeah, they both have a lot more expertise in robotics than I do, but they obviously don't agree. But suppose it happens in 10 years. Well, suddenly there's no more jobs for taxi drivers and Uber drivers, or even a huge effect is the long-term truck drivers.
Right.
And what are those people going to do? But they're not going to become programmers instantly, because it takes a lot of training, a lot of education to become a programmer. So
teach the miners to code. Wasn't that the whole teach the coal miners to code or something? Wasn't that the whole controversial thing where the coal miners were going out of business? And I forgot who said it, but anyway, it was.
Yeah, that's fine if your coal miners went to university
right.
and did lots of math,
right.
but programming is a skill.
It's not a weekend thing. You just pick it up one weekend, right?
That's right. You can't just kind of go into the programming plant and start writing code.
Yep.
So I'm sure some of the coal miners could have become good programmers, but they would have needed lots of retraining. I don't think it's something that everybody can do. So there, really, I think there is a likelihood, at least, that first of all, there is going to be a major impact from AI on not just self-driving cars, but lots of other things. Lots of other jobs are going to become more problematic. And one of the things people have been predicting for a long time, and hasn't happened yet, is having programs that write programs. So that even programming, even the coders could be out of a job. Although certainly at the advanced levels, that's not a risk right now. But there are lots of other things that can be automated, maybe accounting tasks, or the large number of people who help people with their income tax returns. A lot of that probably can be automated, because AI is making some quite dramatic progress right now. Although I think the gap between humans and computers is still much greater than people understand.
Yeah.
Actually, in the book I'm writing right now, it's been quite fun because I've been giving report cards to so 6 of the most interesting developments in AI, rating them on an ABC F scale compared to human beings.
Oh.
And it provides the report card provides a kind of snapshot of how currently things are. And you can see that the gap between human intelligence and computers is still really large, despite the substantial and impressive recent advances in AI.
Interesting. What are those 6? You said there's 6 different tenets you're grading?
Yeah, so I just picked 6 that interest me. One was self-driving cars that I've mentioned. Another is DeepMind's AlphaZero, which has become the best Go and chess player in the world using deep reinforcement learning. IBM's Watson, which got famous for winning Jeopardy, but is now having all sorts of applications in areas like the law and medicine. Google Translate, which I use quite often.
Yep.
It's quite cool. And another thing I use quite often is voice recognition by Alexa and Siri by Amazon and Apple. And what's my 6th one? Can't remember. But for all of them, you can look and see what they're doing, and they're all very impressive in the narrow areas they work. But I don't think we're at any risk of having something like an artificial general intelligence taking over the next couple of decades, which of course would produce gargantuan amounts of unemployment. But obviously for things like self-driving cars, there's going to be lots of people put out of work, and it's not all obvious that there's going to be other jobs for them to move to.
Yeah. So I watched a couple TED Talks, and a couple of them were focused on, perhaps this AI revolution is not different than the whole, agricultural revolution, industrial revolution. and another one was perhaps this one will be different. And on the quote unquote will be different front, one of the examples they gave was, I'm just looking at my notes here, is and a couple of these examples are kind of hinting to the same thing. Blockbuster in 2004. I think this was in the notes I had sent you. At their peak, Blockbuster employed 84,000 people, and they had about $6 billion in revenue. Now that was 2004. In 2016, Netflix, their revenue went to $9 billion, so $6 billion for Blockbuster, $9 billion for Netflix. But from the 84,000 jobs that Blockbuster, supported, Netflix only supports 4,500 jobs. So it's interesting to see that the amount of output, from automation, from computers and machines doing, and just Netflix is mostly a software company. I know I've at our company personally, we look at Netflix as more kind of a shining star as to how to do technology. They're an incredibly sophisticated technology company. It's technology first, everything else second. For them to do what they do is all technology. They're on the bleeding edge of pretty much everything. So that was an interesting just kind of stat. 84,000 jobs.
That reminds me, the sixth system I looked at is recommender systems of the sort that Netflix does very well.
Yeah, exactly right.
If you like this movie, then try that
exactly,
movie.
Yep.
But that's actually very sophisticated analogical reasoning.
Yes, no, it is. Absolutely. Yep, 100%. So that was one study. The other study was in 1998, U.S. citizens worked about 194 billion hours. And they fast forward to 2013. Again, I don't know exactly the study, haven't fact checked it, but whatever. So in 2013, the output increased by 42%. So revenue basically increased by 42%. There were thousands of new businesses started. So the population of the U.S. increased by 40 million people, but the total amount of hours worked was still about 194 billion hours. So it's you start to look at the writing on the wall where increased productivity, increased output, increased profits does not necessarily mean increased people working. So two of those bullet points is kind of like, okay, well that's a data point for maybe this one will be different. The other example he gave was. It was, I got to give the guy credit because he really did a great job in this TED Talk. It was Martin Ford. It was April 2017. He kind of gave an example of a when horses were put out of business basically by the tractors and cars being developed, early 1900s, when they really took off. He said, well, the example there was that the horses were replaced by machines. Great. But did that really put people out of work? Well, no, right? Because you're replacing horses, and people just found other ways. The horse maintainers were just maintaining the machines now, and they had to learn different skills. But now what we're talking about is the machines are starting to replace people, and that's where there's a delta. That's where there's a okay. Well, this maybe is a little bit different because the machines are approaching human ability. Like to your point, we got a ways to go, but they're starting to approach human capability. And however long that'll take to get there is up for debate. But when the horses went away, it wasn't really a threat to human labor. But now that machines are starting to be as competent or more competent than humans in certain tasks, maybe this is a little bit different. Maybe this is something, and who knows what the acceleration will be, but. It seems like there's enough data point there to start to think of this one as a little bit different than the past technological revolutions that caused upheaval and the sky's falling. We need to figure out something with jobs. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that's quite plausible. I think that this is a possible critical transition that is going to change society quite a lot because of different kinds of automation that will be in place. So the reason this is relevant to basic income is if you have all these people suddenly put out of work, well, how are they going to live? Are they all going to be homeless? So every big city in North America, even the cold Canadian cities, have problems with people sleeping in the streets. And so if you've got a basic income, at least you can have ways of providing housing for people like that. San Francisco, I don't know if you've been there recently. This is my son was living there. So, and a
couple months ago,
people, so you got people making wonderful salaries in the tech industry, but on the other hand, you've got huge numbers of people living in the streets and
Oh, it was
squalor.
heartbreaking. So I mean, you're pulling a little heartstring
Yeah.
there, because I hadn't been to San Francisco ever, and I had just been there a few months ago, and we were there for a conference, and you would, to your point, you would almost assume everyone at the conference is pretty much well off. I mean, where it's a technical conference, and in this gigantic, was at the I forget the name of the center, the Moscone Center. I'm messing up the name. Anyway, beautiful. I mean, just absolutely gorgeous, mammoth, gigantic, auditorium with I don't know, it must have been 1 million square feet, just gigantic. And then you walk out of there, and I mean, there's homeless folks just shooting up, heroin right in front of you, and it's just. And I heard about the problem going there, but until you really witness it, you don't, because I'm here in DC and you see it, and it's any big city has that issue, but it was really astounding to witness that. And it was heartbreaking. It really was. And I think I even tweeted out that night, like, the homeless problem here in San Francisco is as absolutely heartbreaking. I'm just not sure how to think about it, but it was just crazy.
But imagine if it got 10 times worse.
Yeah, but I don't think giving any of those, I mean, the folks, I don't know. It seemed like mental illness was such a problem that, was driving a lot of that money was not going to be part of the solution. But I don't know. It's got to be part of the solution at some level, but yeah, it was heartbreaking. It really was. Well, anyway, I mean, I mean, are you optimistic? Are you scared of this AI? The singularity, is it coming? Do you think, what's his name? The Google director of engineering. There we go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I think he's off probably he thinks it's going to happen within a few decades. And I'm thinking maybe more tens of decades.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Yeah, especially given the report cards I just mentioned. If you actually look at what human intelligence amounts to, there are aspects of it that nobody in AI has a clue how to implement. In 2 weeks in Montreal is the annual meeting of the Cognitive Science Society. And I've organized a symposium called How Does Current AI Stack Up Against Human Intelligence? And I've got some leading AI people and some top psychologists who are going to be discussing that issue. And I think I only have people's abstracts, but my view is that having human level AI is just much farther off than people realize. One thing that I'm going to be talking about that I'm going to focus on is understanding causality. I mean, every cat that can bat at a mouse has some sort of rudimentary understanding of causality, that if you see something and you bat at it, then you're going to see it change. Right. And it could do, because it's got a body that's interacting with it. And AI has got, as I said, some really fabulous accomplishments right now, but the top people will admit that their systems just don't grasp causality. There's something else that people have. Even infants have this. The little babies, a few months old, have got a kind of rudimentary understanding of causality, as experiments have shown. So that's somehow either built into or learned really fast by all vertebrates. But AI systems doesn't have that. Is there a way of building it in? Well, maybe. I've actually got some ideas of how you might do that. But this is just one example of a large number of things that are quite fundamental to human thinking that nobody has a clue how to put into AI right now. I'm not saying it's impossible. There's some bad philosophical arguments that say that AI is impossible. I just think there are just huge technological challenges still to be met before the software that runs on hardware that's part of computer systems can do the full range of things that humans do.
I think you just nailed it. In fact, I was, chomping at the bit to kind of say that as well. That's the one thing I see as is the huge divide. We as humans have this amazing computer in our head, but also this amazingly finely detailed physical system that we can manipulate things, and those two things, those two things interacting together is where I don't think, quote unquote, robots have even come close to. Now there's some impressive things. You look at your Boston Dynamics and all that, but their robots are pretty impressive. But I mean, the ability for a human being to interact in any situation and just think their way out of it or manipulate their environment in the most infinite, amount of ways and to benefit that human survival is just, that's kind of where I see the biggest divide is the physical meets the the brain part of it.
Yeah. And of course, there have been advances in the physical part, not just Boston Dynamics robots, but if you think about driverless cars, I mean, they are robots and they're doing some really amazing things that wouldn't have been predictable 10 years ago, and being able to at least drive around nice warm places like Arizona and California. Right. So there's lots of progress there, but still they have narrow things they can do. They can drive around. They can't put together IKEA furniture. So,
well, a lot of us humans can't either, by the way. But
okay.
Yeah, that's true. That's true, right? When it comes to the car itself, I just look at that as it's a physical system, but it's really, I feel like it's mostly just a brain that has brakes, gas. It's not, if you throw a ball at it, can't catch the ball in midair and throw a curveball at you and go around. It's just kind of responding to what the really powerful brain and sensor is doing. But
so it's solving a fairly narrow problem.
Right.
And as is true for the deep mind systems and IBM's Watson, they're still solving fairly narrow problems. What's amazing about humans is even when you go grocery shopping, you're solving a whole bunch of different kinds of problems of figuring out how to get from one place to another, how to get stuff off the shelves, how to decide what you're going to cook for dinner, how you're going to get along with your family, depending on what you bring home. So we're solving lots of different kinds of problems.
Depending on who's going to be at dinner. Yep.
Right. So humans can solve a lot of different sorts of problems, and that's going to be way off. But nevertheless, you don't have to have full artificial intelligence, human level artificial intelligence, for the advances in AI to be problems in putting lots of people out of work. So we look what is happening in retail. So lots of the standard retail shops are shutting down. Places like Sears going bankrupt in Canada. I don't know if it's still operating in the U.S. So a lot of the standard stores are gone. And then you could say, oh yeah, but the jobs are being replaced because Amazon has these big warehouses where lots of people are getting jobs. But of course, in the warehouses, they're being replaced by robots and computer systems.
Robots, right?
And
right.
So Amazon is trying to automate as much as possible. So there's no guarantee now that the jobs lost as a result of AI are going to be around in some other form.
Well, I think we kind of summarized that we're a ways off, so no one hit the panic button that's listening to this just yet. But I mean, for young folks listening, hey, getting into software, I think is not in AI and machine learning is not a bad thing, for sure.
Oh, it's incredibly hot right now. There's loads of jobs. They're good jobs. They're well-paying jobs. They're good working conditions by and large. So sure, no, that's all highly true. I'm actually glad that both my sons have ended up in computer areas.
Oh, really? Oh, interesting. Yeah. Very cool. Otherwise, I think they would have a problem with Dad. No, I mean, if as enthusiastic as you are about
this. I showed programming when they were about 7, so they had a bit of a
very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, Paul, I appreciate it. So anything else you want to leave the listeners with? Like I said, you're always writing, but what's the latest, greatest, book you have out there that people should check out?
Well, the ones that just came out that's closely connected to this is called Natural Philosophy. But if people are more interested in the general questions about how the mind works, the other book that came out in February, well, actually 2 other books, but one's called Brain Mind, which provides a quite comprehensive account of how we can understand how minds work based on brains. But for the more philosophical, ethical things, Natural Philosophy is the better book. So there's 2 books that are new since February, 3 books as well. There's also one that deals with explaining social change based on mechanisms that operate both in minds, but also in the interactions between minds, the communications we have. So there's lots of stuff out there. But of course, if people want something easier, there's always my blog for Psychology Today, where I try to keep it simple and accessible.
Yeah, I love, again, I think I said it last time, but I love that blog because you kind of raise it up a level. You don't go too deep, but just enough to let folks get really almost, you kind of can sink your teeth in at a higher level, and then you can follow your some of your more detailed work for sure. But very cool. Well, Paul, I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for your time.
Oh, it's great chatting with you again.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you got something out of it. Thanks for listening. And we'll see you next time. See you.